heard of us before? Oh, goodness. How about Bellevue Historical Society? Marymore Museum? Okay. We're both of those organizations. The two groups merged in 2001 to form one of the largest heritage organizations on the east side. The vision is, and was, but still is, to build a destination heritage museum and research facility for all of the east side residents and heritage organizations to benefit from. So we can showcase our collection, hold programs, have a facility that school groups and we can put on education programs that other heritage organizations could participate in as well, for displays if they wanted and such. And of course, to be a research facility, we have an extensive collection of archives, photographs, ephemera, you name it, and we want the public to access those. And right now, what we do is we operate, for those of you who knew Marymore Museum, you know that it closed. And so right now we operate out of two different facilities in Bellevue. Both of those are in partnership with the city. The city owns the facilities. It's probably a very similar situation to what goes on here in Kirkland. The Winters House on Bellevue Way, near I-90, the Blueberry Farm, which is the only site in Bellevue on the National Register of Historic Places. And we have our public research facility there, and our archives primarily are housed there, and people can come and research, as I said. Then we also have space at the McDowell House. It's a 1918 farmhouse across from the Botanical Gardens on Wilburton Hill. And when we had to move out of Marymore, in addition to the collection having to go into storage, the offices that house the staff, they had no place to go. And so the city of Bellevue had this facility that they were willing to open up to us for our home. And so we exist there, and we are crammed. Anybody who's been there, it's crammed to the brim, every nook and cranny with stuff. We have a staff, 5 people, 6 people actually now. I'm the director. We have a curator, an archivist, an education coordinator, public programs coordinator, and we recently hired a fund development manager. And in addition to having the largest collection of stuff, but this group knows what artifacts is, everything from farm equipment to quilts, textiles, shoes, hats, kitchen utensils, you name it, we have it. And the photographs, we also have professional staff to curate that, to look after that, and then to help other heritage organizations. So Lynette referred to the kinds of things that we do in partnership. And our archivist, Megan Carlisle, has been here a couple of times and has worked with Louie and Dale to get them a bit familiar with Past Perfect, and I bet they know more about Past Perfect now than probably we do. And then Megan has come in to give some advice on archiving, and that's what we want to be. We want to be a resource for the community. We work also a bit with Redmond Historical Society. We're talking about doing some joint exhibit in the old schoolhouse if we can. We are located in Bellevue, but we cover the east side. And then because Bellevue Historical Society doesn't exist anymore, we are primarily also the local heritage organization for Bellevue. What other things do I want to tell you about us before I get to our topic? Some of the public programming that we put on, in exchange for the spaces that we occupy that are owned by the city, we provide services. So we put on programs in the community. For example, there's a 18, so I can read my notes. There's an 1888 log cabin in one of the City of Bellevue's parks. And so we keep that open one day a month through the summer, spring and summer. So 6 months of the year we have that open. We dress in period costume. We have volunteers that staff a corn grinding table, churn butter, things like that. And the public and kids in particular come and enjoy that activity. One example of what we do for the City of Bellevue. And then we participate in the local farmers markets with a booth. We work very closely with the schools. We have treasure boxes, which are kits that have curriculum and then artifacts, and the kids get a hands-on experience of what history is. And those go out to the schools. They go to the Bellevue School District, Lake Washington School District, and then most recently we partnered specifically with the Bellevue School District on an 8th grade curriculum, which we were very excited about because probably, as a lot of you know, it's easier to get in at to the elementary schools. The teachers want to do more exciting things with kids at that level. But once you get to middle school and high school, you know, they're cramming for tests and they've got WASLs and SAT, all kinds of things to focus on, and it's harder to convince the teachers or the schools that they should do local history. And the Bellevue School District approached us as they were revamping their 8th grade curriculum, and they said, you know, is there something we could do with you? So we developed a kit. Every single student in 8th grade in Bellevue will do this program. They will study local government. They have primary source documents from the 30s through to today, and they have to look at how government reacted to changes over time. You know, why did Bellevue incorporate, or why did they turn what was just a 2-lane road into 405, and how, you know, how did that impact the community, and how did government relate to that? And then the students, by studying those primary documents, had to answer certain questions, do assessments, and at the end they create a monument to something in Bellevue's history. And it was so popular, it's now officially part of the curriculum. Every year they will do that going forward, and we're working hopefully on something for 7th grade to do with the lowering of Lake Washington, more geography related. So we're excited mostly because kids are going to be learning about local history, and I think we all want that for the future generation. We want to have a room like this full of people 20, 30, 40 years from now interested in their community. And so working with the schools is one way that we can do that. And then the other kinds of things we do are these presentations. Years ago, I was telling a story to Dale. We always had our presentations on slideshows, you know, the carousels. And we started to go to digital presentations because it would be fun to do then and now photos, for example. People really like to look at those, as we all do. And I was giving a presentation at the Bellevue Kiwanis, and I had it all set up, digital then and now presentation. Well, it wouldn't work. We couldn't get the computer to talk to the projector, and it just didn't work. So I gave a call to my education coordinator at the time, and I said, Barb, can you run down here with one of our old slideshows and set it all up, and gave the slideshow old-fashioned style. And what you're going to see today is actually that old slideshow, which we got a grant from the Bellevue Rotary to convert all of our slideshows into digital presentations. And so we'll keep the old ones, just in case. But what it's allowed us to do is some of the slides that had been done originally, the quality of the photos wasn't all that great, so we've been able to go back, if possible, and find the original photos and the original negatives and rescan them, and then update the slideshow, of course, as we've uncovered some new information on various themes. So we go out to the community to give these presentations just like you get from a lot of other people, I'm sure. And the one caveat I'll give on this is that I am not the expert on this topic. And I would welcome anything that you know, number one, if I say something that you know is not true, please let me know so we can fix our notes. But also, if you have additional information or a story that you want to share on something that you see, we'd love to hear about it. I roped one of our volunteers, Steve Williams, into coming with me in the event that there's questions that I don't know how to answer. Maybe he'll know how to answer. But one thing I like about doing these programs is I learn as much from you, I think, as hopefully you'll learn from this presentation. So let's see if we can get this to work. We're going to talk about getting around on the east side. It's essentially how people were getting around the east side of Lake Washington from the early times to the present, where they were going and what they were doing. Oh, see, now it doesn't work. We're going to had it on for too long. While I'm fixing the battery, one thing I didn't tell you was we put on the annual Strawberry Festival in Bellevue in June. And that's a festival that we revived from the original Lake Washington Festival, and everything that the Lake Washington Strawberry Festival from the 20s and 30s, and all the research that we have done on the history of the festival. One of the biggest, most popular parts of the original festivals was a baseball game between Kirkland and Bellevue. And they would parade from Kirkland along Lake Washington Boulevard and end up in Bellevue, and it was a great rivalry. They would have like a Kirkland Day and a Redmond Day, and the various cities were responsible for the entertainment at the festival for that entire day. It would be kind of cool if we could recreate that. We're not a 3 or 4 day festival, it's only 2 days, but we're hoping to bring back a touch of history with the Strawberry Festival. Okay, hopefully this will work this time. Excellent. The Eastside Story begins hundreds of years ago with the travels of the Native Americans who lived and still live on the east side. In the early days, they walked along footpaths all around the east side, and the broken line on this map here shows some of the places around Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish where people walked. This photo comes from the Journal American. Some people were on their way to food gathering areas, while others were traveling to fishing grounds, summer or winter houses and villages, or to trade for special items. And what we see here are cattails. This woman, her name is Mary Louie. Fascinating story. She was a Snoqualmie woman and respected elder of her people. She was born at Tolt, now Carnation, in 1798, and she lived to be 120 years old. During her life, she made several trips over the Cascade Mountains to Yakima and back to her home on the eastern shores of Lake Sammamish. She walked barefoot and carried her walking stick for support and protection against large animals that she might meet along the way. When European settlers moved into the east side, Mary Louie helped them by assisting with births, using her knowledge of herbs, and selling or trading vegetables that she grew. The settlers gave her scraps of cloth that she made into rag rugs. And like many Native Americans, she sold her goods at the market in Seattle, and she could travel from Seattle to Issaquah by canoe because the Duwamish and Black Rivers were higher and connected the lakes to Puget Sound at that time. When she paddled along the Sammamish River, she stopped to camp at one of her favorite places, which was Merrimore Park. In the 1890s, Native American people came by canoe. This photo's from Mohi. And they came to work for settlers by picking hops at Issaquah and Fall City. They brought their families and goods with them. Both groups began to use horses for travel, and soon the old footpaths that were the Native American footpaths were broadened into horse and wagon trails. And this photo is Cottage Lake Road, 1910. Yeah, it might. I wonder. Can't quite tell. It does look like there's wooden slats there, doesn't it? Yeah. For people, who used to travel miles between villages and towns, they would the Snoqualmie Pass, and this is the Snoqualmie Room, to be exact. There's a name for it. As the East Side grew, people needed to communicate between settlements, such as Issaquah, Duval, Kirkland, Houghton, Redmond, and Bellevue. Mail was one of the ways of communicating, of course, and in the early 1890s, May Johnson, whom you see here, picked up mail in Houghton and delivered it to the Bellevue post office. She traveled twice a week by horse, and to protect herself from wild animals such as bears and cougars, she carried a small container of pepper. This greeting card shows another way that mail was delivered to the scattered communities on the east side during the 1900s. So not on horseback, but by wagon. By the 1860s, coal had been discovered at Issaquah and the Newcastle mines were opened. And this is the Issaquah coal mine. A tramway was built on Newcastle Hill and carried the coal to the eastern shore of Lake Washington, where it was loaded onto barges and ferried across the lake to Seattle. By 1890, a track, like those seen on the right, had been laid down to serve the Newcastle and Coal Creek mines. The coal was transported by train on the Seattle and Walla Walla track to Seattle. The tall, old-growth Douglas fir and cedar trees that covered the land offered excellent building material for the mines, homes, and boats, and loggers and mills appeared all over the east side. Huge trees were felled and the land cleared. To haul the logs to the mill for sawing, skid roads were built of logs greased with animal fats. Then the cut logs were pulled or skidded over the roads by oxen. And there's definitely the wood laid down. At other times, mules or horses pulled the heavy logs along. And later, the animals were replaced by narrow gauge steam engines. And the steam engines were replaced by railroads and locomotives. And this is the Hewitt mill in Bellevue, not too far from where one of our sites is, the McDowell House up on Wilburton Hill. Lumbermen could also use the water to transport logs. These logs are floating on Lake Sammamish, and they're ready to be cut into boards at the mill. And I mean, you can barely tell that that's the water between the logs there. Small boats, such as this one, Tugboat Daisy, were used to move the logs into place. At the mill, the logs were cut into boards or split into shingles. Men who made shingles were called shingle weavers. Does anybody here have a shingle weaver in their ancestry? After they were made, the shingles were transported by horse and wagon to the building site or train station. Stores began to appear to serve the loggers and miners. And notice the delivery wagon and the animal skins hanging at the red meat market. One large bear. People usually came by horse and buggy to trade and to shop. And the store picture here is located on Leary Way in Redmond. And take a look at the list of items that can be purchased at the post office. So you've got hay, grain, feed, flour, lime, and cement at the post office. Some people traveled by stagecoach to shop or to get around. This is the Redmond stagecoach. Others, like these children, walked along footpaths. This one is actually 104th and 8th in Bellevue, which means Bellevue Way and 8th, which means Bellevue Square. Believe it or not. Northup Way in Bellevue was a dirt road in the late 1800s and early 1900s. School children walked along it to the old Northup School. The road may have followed one of the early footpaths used by the Native Americans. And what's neat is the school is still there. There's another school in there now, which the name escapes me. But they use that building for offices. I don't think it's actually for the school part that's been built.
So is that in Highland?
No. So this is, right, exactly. So 116th, and you can't cross it, like, you have to get around, you know where 116th splits?
It's kind of the little school, I think it's called.
The little school, that's exactly what it is, yeah. So you can't take 116th straight through it, you've got to get around. The little school, yeah, it's a private school.
Yeah, it's
And that building is still pretty much right where it is, where it was. The tower isn't there anymore. For walkers and shoppers in Issaquah, wooden sidewalks like the one you see in this photograph were raised up to protect the people from the splatter of mud from passing horses. As the land was cleared by loggers, farmers moved into the east side. They grew hay, which they harvested and moved to the barns, feeding areas, and stores. The hay was often used to feed dairy cows like those you see here. And this is the Dewey Dairy Barn at Kelsey Creek Farm in Bellevue, where the Fraser cabin is now located, the 1888 cabin. Milk from Eastside dairies was transported to trucks by homes, trains, and to Seattle. By the early 1900s, roads needed to be improved for the increased traffic. Road crews used teams of workhorses to widen footpaths for wagon travel. And so this is, it says it's the Westlake Sammamish Parkway. And we think this is pretty close to Marymore Park. Horses were also used to build wooden plank roads, like the one you see to the far left, behind the wagon in this picture. The gravel and fill for the road was carried in the wagon and emptied through the container at the side of the wagon. So there's a container there. I think that's it.
So where in Kirkland was that? Does anybody know?
And
that was
I
Let me
think
see
so.
if I have extra notes on that one. No, I don't.
The bank is,
The bank.
with a Seafirst Bank, or the.
Bank of America now?
The improved roads and travel brought people to the east side. Some came for pleasure and to stay at places like the Lake House of Kirkland, and others settled and worked on the east side.
Was that Kirkley's home?
That's Kirby's.
What, Michael?
Have you saw registry?
Northeast 59. No, it's Kirkley's.
Northeast 59th.
I don't think that's the Kirkley place. It was right across the street from this place. That was in there.
Okay, what this, my extra notes say, John and Abigail Fish, Lake House family. We, part of our process of getting them updated, the one part that's not finished is the captions. So, the next time we'll have more detail, but.
Okay, Heather. It was held by Dale Bonner, and then it was
across the street from us.
Across the street and up the hill by Kid Valley.
and up the hill, it's directly across the street from Kid Valley. So that great big, huge office.
But built by Bonner.
Yeah.
Like it was built by
There's
Dale
one,
Bonner,
there's a
and
series
then it was
of
purchased by the Fish,
Mhm.
and the Fish and the Kirtley families are related, they married one another. And, yeah, I can send you a file information on it.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm not sure what we have, I'd forgotten to caveat, Megan said, please tell them it's almost finished, but the captions aren't on there, so, but this is the kind of information that certainly, if we had, we could elaborate on.
I think it was run as a hotel once too with her.
It was,
Well, you know, what's interesting is, see, I mean, it says Lake House, which makes it seem it was, well, I suppose somebody put that up on their house, but they're clearly trying to indicate it for something.
it was built to be a private house, it turned out to be too much house, so it was sold and run as a hotel.
And then Kirkley's bought it as a private home.
So,
Supposedly, people coming down from Snoqualmie, they would stop at the lake house. It would take them a day to get from Snoqualmie to the lake house, and then they would go across the lake on one of the boats to get to Seattle, so it was a 2-day trip.
Okay.
and they watched the Seattle fire
Oh,
from the lake house. And we have good pictures of it, before it was torn down.
See it, ask too many questions on that. So what happens when you decide you're gonna buy the cheap version?
You need fresh batteries.
No, it's okay, I think it gets out, it falls out of its slot. There we go. In the early 1900s, the first automobiles arrived, and this was the first car in Monaghan.
Where's Monty?
Eastside Racing, down by Alexander Beach, or Alexander Beaches.
East side of Lake Sammamish, down by Alexander. Thanks. And of course, because of the cars, gasoline stations appeared, and this is Main Street in Bellevue about 1930. Garages became a part of the town business, and this is Buckley's Garage in Bellevue.
Buckley's in Bellevue or Redmond?
Redmond.
Frank Bucks.
Frank Buck had Redmond garage.
Yeah, yeah, so that, I don't know why that's in Bellevue.
And he started
I don't
out,
know where Buckley's Garage in Bellevue is.
and he started out in Kirkland.
Do you have photos of the first, of his place in Kirkland?
Yeah.
Maybe that's Kirkland on that.
No, it isn't.
Redmond.
That's right.
That's Redmond.
I bet if we read the stuff more closely, we'd see. And people rode buses called jitneys for business purposes. The engine had overheated in this one, so that's why they're pouring water into the.
That's my sister, for the fun.
Nobody knows who I
Buses were also used for sightseeing and pleasure. And this is probably one of the most popular Redmond photos. You see this a lot.
That's a happy looking. That's a
They must have
happy.
been happy sightseeing. But. Oh, there's probably these guys are smiling. They're in the front. And of course, children, school children also use the buses, and this is the Redmond Elementary School. People drove everywhere to Bellevue Mercantile Company on Main Street, up the widened native footpath over Snoqualmie Pass. So now the footpath is a little bit more of a road. This is 1916. Beside the Wilburton Railroad trestle to Bellevue and to Renton, that's the road followed the trestle along. They drove to work. The Messon Woolen Mill.
Where was that?
Where was it? Behind us.
Just down from here, is that
On the water.
right? The state has some great, the state archives has great indoor shots of the Woolen Mill in action. They of course drove to the tavern to relax with the guys, and this is the Redmond Saloon. And some people even bought racing cars.
That's a gunner in front there.
Pretty large. And others bought motorcycles. See, my guy's on a motorcycle. Looks like you might be towing the car. Mailmen used cars, of course. And some families took their cars on camping trips. And this is, the Hill family was a Bellevue family, and it's 1921. But roads weren't the only way to travel. Like the Native Americans before them, new settlers used boats to navigate the many rivers, lakes, and streams on the east side. Many of the local waterways can be seen in this map. Sammamish River, or the Slough, connects Lake Sammamish to Lake Washington and runs north from Redmond through Woodinville and Bothell to Kenmore. The straight lines across Lake Washington, so these there, show the ferry system, ferry routes. The boats were called the Mosquito Fleet, and perhaps that's because there were so many of them and they ran so often. After all, that was the only way that people, including high school students, could get across the lake to Seattle before 1940. Anybody here go to high school in Seattle by taking the ferry across?
They came from Seattle to Kirkland because they got kicked out of Seattle. Sorry, but that's the way it was.
We came over to see the wild animals.
I worked in Seattle in 1938, 39, and took the Lincoln back and forth every day.
So from the Kirkland dock, were you in Kirkland at the time?
Yeah,
To the Kirkland dock?
Madison, and the trolley, downtown, in Bon Boucher.
Yeah. Fabulous. Did they bring it back?
Come over to work at the shipyards too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And talking about shipbuilding, Mr. John Anderson, as everyone here I believe knows, started the Anderson Shipbuilding Company that operated ferry boats on Lake Washington. And this is from this picture actually comes from the On the Ways publication, August 4th, 1944. But this picture is in 1908. From the 1880s to the 1940s, ferry boats and steamboats were busy carrying people, horses and buggies, goods and automobiles across Lake Washington. And here, the single trip was 15 cents, round trip 25 cents, 12-trip commutation ticket, 8 1/3 cents. Charlie couldn't fix that. Trip total $1. So, and then the rates for by pounds and including driver, round trip. 10 single trips including driver for a truck. Light auto. Let's go all the way up to, if you're 5 tons, it costs you $8. The ferry Urania, for example, took tourists on sightseeing trips. 18-mile trip for 25 cents. And the ferry Washington transported automobiles. There were ferry docks in Kirkland. Does that look familiar?
Charlie Chaplin in the front.
Ferry docks in Bellevue and Badenbauer Bay, in Medina, and Juanita. And the wood in this photograph was used to heat the boilers. That's all the wood that was piled up. Many families owned small boats of their own. And this Badenbauer Bay approximately 1915, and you can see the boats lined up there. Tourists and visitors could rent boats from the Monaghan Boat Company, located on the eastern shore of Lake Sammamish, as we just heard. And people came to the east side to camp in the fresh air. So, Lake Sammamish in 1909. And they also came to enjoy the beautiful scenery, as well as the entertainment at beaches and dance halls. I love the Juanita Beach photos, they're great.
I had that picture down at the Merrill Gardens.
Oh,
In Kirkland, somebody has drawn it on one wall. It's beautiful.
oh, neat. So they did like an artistic rendering of them.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the best uses of historic photos, is when artists take them and interpret them into something.
Very nice.
Until 1939, the population was relatively low on the east side. But on July 3rd, 1940, something happened that changed the east side forever. As we all know, the I-90 floating bridge was finished and open for use. The bridge connected Seattle with Mercer Island and Bellevue. And people and businesses streamed into the area because it was now so accessible from Seattle. People no longer had to take the ferry across Lake Washington or drive miles around the lake to get to the east side. Soon people could drive along the bridge and across the lake. So the promotional brochure, tourism brochure for Bellevue. And, of course, they could get to the new Bellevue Square Shopping Center, and the Freeman family was one of the biggest promoters of the bridge. During World War II, many people came to the east side to work at the Lake Washington shipyards, building the boats for the Navy. After the war, families moved from Seattle to live in the growing suburbs, those such as Redmond, Kirkland, and Bellevue. And soon, another bridge was needed. Kind of looks like that now, doesn't it? In 1963, the Evergreen Point Floating Bridge opened.
62.
Yep, sorry, I misread my notes here. You're right. Jumping ahead. And in, this photo is approximately 1965, and in Bellevue, Highway 2A was widened to become 405. What a difference 70 years makes. And yet some things remain the same. Although most of the farms and lifestyles of the early days are gone, people are still traveling for the same reasons and using many of the same roads. So as you can see, Northeast 8th and Bellevue Way, 1937, 2007, and then if you remember that photo from much earlier, it's that same intersection. So thank you for listening to my little presentation this evening, and if you have questions that I'm able to answer, I would be happy to try. But also, I'd be very interested to hear some of your stories about maybe transportation on the east side or some of your memories. For those of you who don't know about me in particular, I come from the East Coast and from Canada. And so the best way for me to have discovered and feel like home is I got involved with the local heritage community, because there's no better way to learn about where you're moving to than to study its past. And I'm fascinated by every news story. I learn something new every single day. So please, I'm sure you can tell me more than any place.